For nearly a decade, Andy Griffith brought comfort into American living rooms every Monday night. He was the kind of father figure people wished they had growing up, patient, wise, and steady. But the man behind that beloved sheriff's badge carried wounds the cameras never saw. Failed marriages, a son lost too soon, and a first wife who slipped away quietly while the world still adored her husband. By the time Andy drew his final breath in the summer of 2012, he had weathered a lifetime of private storms that stood in sharp contrast to the sunny world of Mayberry. This is the story of who he really was. A childhood shaped by hardship. The warmth Andy Griffith radiated on screen did not come naturally. It was built, carefully, painfully, on top of something much harder. He was born on June 1, 1926, in Mount Airy, North Carolina, to a working-class family that struggled to stay afloat during the Great Depression. His father worked as a carpenter and house painter, but steady income was never guaranteed. The family lived modestly, without some of the basic comforts other households took for granted. Growing up poor in a small town meant everyone could see it. And the children around Andy made sure he felt it. He was bullied relentlessly, mocked for the way he dressed, for where his family stood in the social order, for simply being different. School, which should have been a place of possibility, became a daily ordeal. The teasing was not occasional. It was consistent and grinding, and it left emotional marks that stayed with him long after the schoolyard was behind him. To cope, young Andy turned to two things, music and faith. He taught himself guitar and banjo, losing himself in melody when the world outside felt too cruel. He also found belonging in his local church, eventually feeling drawn toward the ministry. These twin passions, performing and believing, became the foundation everything else was built on. At Mount Airy High School, he found a stage. Drama and music programs gave him an outlet, a place where being different could become an asset instead of a liability. He was no longer just the poor kid from the wrong side of town. He was the one who could make people feel something. After graduation, he enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, initially intending to study for the ministry. But music pulled him in a different direction, and he graduated in 1949 with a degree in music. He took a teaching job at a high school in Goldsboro, North Carolina, instructing students in music and drama by day while performing humorous monologues at churches and civic clubs on weekends. Then came the breakthrough. In 1953, he recorded a live comedy piece, a rambling, funny monologue told from the perspective of a country preacher encountering college football for the first time. The recording took off, selling hundreds of thousands of copies and turning a schoolteacher into a national name almost overnight. He left teaching, moved toward the entertainment world, landed on Broadway, and eventually made his way to Hollywood. The rage and insecurity from his childhood had been transformed into something audiences could not look away from. The price of playing it straight. By the early 1960s, Andy Griffith was one of the most recognized faces in American television. His show dominated the ratings for 8 seasons and gave the country something it desperately wanted, a place where decency still ruled and problems could be solved with a conversation and a little common sense. But playing Sheriff Andy Taylor came with quiet frustrations. The show's biggest laughs often belonged to Don Knotts, whose portrayal of the bumbling deputy Barney Fife made him a comedic force of nature. Andy had specifically brought Knotts in because he understood what that energy would add, but there were moments when standing at the center of your own show and watching someone else steal every scene took a toll on his sense of purpose as a performer. When the show ended in 1968, Andy walked away on his own terms. He had no desire to spend the rest of his career playing the same character indefinitely. But America had other ideas. Every new role he attempted was silently measured against that gentle, familiar sheriff. Variety shows came and went. Television movies failed to connect. He was trapped inside an image he had outgrown but could not shed. The professional wilderness lasted years. Through most of the 1970s and into the early 1980s, he struggled to find a foothold. Financial pressures were real. Work was inconsistent. The certainty of having been a household name offered little comfort when the phone stopped ringing as often as it once had. Then, in 1986, came redemption. He was cast as Ben Matlock in a legal drama that fit him like a well-worn suit. Matlock was sharp, folksy, southern, and always a step ahead, familiar enough to feel comfortable but complex enough to stretch. Audiences welcomed him back immediately. The show ran for 9 seasons and introduced him to viewers who had grown up after Mayberry. The comeback was real and lasting. Love, loss, and 3 marriages. Andy Griffith met his first wife, Barbara Bray Edwards, during his college years at Chapel Hill. She was his age, born in the same year, and shared his love for music and performance. She sang, she acted, and she had a natural confidence on stage that Andy was still developing. They married in August of 1949, just after graduation, and set out to build a life together. Barbara was a grounding presence during the years when Andy was still finding his way, teaching during the day, performing at night, building towards something neither of them could quite see yet. Friends described her as a calming influence on a man who carried a short temper beneath his easygoing public manner. They could not have children biologically, a private sorrow they kept to themselves. They chose adoption instead, welcoming a son they named Sam in 1957 and a daughter named Dixie a few years later. From the outside, everything looked right. But the relentless demands of fame began pulling them apart. Andy was consumed by the show, not just as a performer but as someone deeply involved in how it was made. Barbara had given up much of her own artistic life to raise the children and manage a household that no longer belonged only to them. The distance between them grew slowly, then all at once. After 23 years of marriage, they divorced in 1972. The years that followed brought 2 more marriages. The first was to Solika Kassat, a Greek actress, whom he married in 1973. It lasted roughly 6 years before ending in 1981, the pressures of career and incompatibility once again proving too much. Then, while filming a television movie in the early 1980s, he met Cindy Knight, a Florida-born actress nearly 3 decades his junior. They married in April 1983, and what began quickly proved to be the most enduring relationship of his life. Cindy understood the business. More importantly, she seemed to understand Andy himself, not the television character, but the complicated, driven, emotionally scarred man beneath it. She traveled with him, supported him through the Matlock years, and remained his anchor as his health declined and the world grew quieter around them. In her, he found what had always eluded him, genuine, lasting stability. A father's unbearable loss. The greatest pain of Andy Griffith's life had nothing to do with career struggles or failed marriages. It had to do with his son. Sam Griffith grew into adulthood carrying heavy burdens. He battled alcoholism and substance abuse for years, waging a private war that his famous father watched helplessly from the sidelines. Sam stayed in North Carolina, worked in real estate, and tried to build a life separate from his father's shadow. But the addictions were relentless. Andy had spent years on television playing a father who always found the right words, who could shepherd a child through any difficulty with patience and grace. Real life offered no such script. He could not write a resolution for what Sam was facing. He could only watch, hope, and grieve. In 1996, Sam died at the age of 38. The years of struggle had finally taken everything. The family kept the details private, but the loss was total. Those close to Andy noted that he was never quite the same afterward. He became more withdrawn, more guarded. The grief aged him in ways that time alone could not explain. Cindy stood beside him through the darkness, but some losses are simply too large to be carried away by love alone. The quiet ending. In his final years, Andy Griffith lived quietly with Cindy on Roanoke Island on the North Carolina coast, far from Hollywood, close to the land that had shaped him. His health had been fragile for some time. Heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure had gradually narrowed the life he could lead. In 2000, he underwent quadruple heart bypass surgery. He recovered, but the procedure marked a turning point from which he never fully bounced back. In his last years, he needed assistance walking and rarely left his property. He had become a private man in every sense. No interviews, no public appearances, no seeking of the spotlight that had once followed him everywhere. He let it go, and the peace he found in that letting go seemed genuine. On the morning of July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith died of a heart attack at his home, surrounded by the people he loved. He was 86 years old. In keeping with his wishes, he was buried privately within hours of his passing. No public ceremony, no celebrity tributes, no cameras. Just the quiet dignity he had spent the last chapter of his life earning. His first wife, Barbara, had preceded him by more than 3 decades. After their divorce, she stepped away from public life entirely, raising their children out of the spotlight. She battled illness privately and passed away in 1980 at just 53 years old. Andy received the news without public comment, but those around him said it struck him deeply. Barbara had known him before any of it, before the record, before Broadway, before Mayberry. Her loss was another chapter the world never read. When Andy died, America mourned a television icon. But the man himself had already lived through so much more than any of his characters ever faced. The real story of Andy Griffith was not filmed in Mayberry. It was lived in the quiet spaces between takes, in the grief he carried alone, and in the stubborn, persistent search for peace that finally found him at the edge of the Carolina coast.